The morning shift at Willow Island had only been underway for an hour when a sound cut through the usual noise of the job site. It wasn't the grind of concrete buckets or the chatter of workers moving along the scaffolding. It was a sharp metallic crack, high and clean, echoing inside cooling tower number 2 like a snapped bone. Men working 166 feet above the ground turned instinctively toward the crane, expecting to see the concrete bucket still rising. Instead, they saw the hoist line suddenly go slack, whipping once in the air before falling still. For a brief moment, nothing moved. The wind barely touched the half-finished shell. The only sound was the scrape of boots as workers shifted their weight, trying to understand what had just happened. Then the platform beneath them shuddered. One carpenter dropped his hammer and lunged for the railing. Another turned toward the only ladder bolted to the tower wall. Several men shouted warnings that were swallowed instantly by the tower's hollow echo. The concrete they were anchored into had been poured the day before, and it was still green, barely strong enough to hold its own weight. As they watched in disbelief, the top ring of the tower cracked away from the rest of the structure. It didn't break cleanly. It peeled, slowly at first, like a giant strip of concrete being pulled loose. The failure spread along the circumference in both directions, racing faster than anyone on the scaffold could react. The platform ring that circled the interior was attached directly to that fresh concrete. When the shell began to tear, the heavy bolts securing the scaffold ripped free one after another, each one snapping with a sound like a gunshot. A worker near the center of the platform reached for a support beam that vanished beneath his hands. The entire scaffold, along with cranes, tools, wooden forms, and 51 men, dropped together in a single collapsing mass. They fell the full height of the tower into its open center. Dust and debris burst upward in a violent plume that shot out of the top like smoke from a chimney. On the ground, a laborer who had just stepped away from his truck looked up at the sound and froze. Where the platform had been seconds earlier, there was now only empty space and drifting dust. It was April 27th, 1978. By midday, Willow Island would be known for the deadliest construction accident in American history. The Pleasance Power Station rose along the Ohio River during a period when utilities raced to build new generating units. Willow Island needed 2 massive natural draft cooling towers to feed the new coal-fired plant. Tower 1 was already finished. Tower 2, where the collapse occurred, was climbing in 5-foot lifts, each poured on top of the last in a daily rhythm designed to keep the project on schedule. The contractor, Research Cottrell, used a jump form system that eliminated the need to build tall scaffolding from the ground. Instead, a circular platform was bolted into the concrete shell. When workers finished a lift, they jacked the platform up and bolted it into the next ring. It worked well when each lift was allowed to cure fully. At Willow Island, it wasn't. The previous day's concrete had been poured in cool, damp weather. By the time workers climbed onto it the next morning, it was barely 20 hours old. Tests later showed it had reached only a fraction of the strength needed to support the scaffolding, the cranes, the weight of equipment, and the 51 men who stepped onto it before dawn. But schedules were tight, and the lift had been accepted without hesitation. Other shortcuts compounded the danger. Investigators later found missing bolts where the scaffold should have been anchored securely into the concrete. Some bolts that were used were lower grade than the design required. The hoist system for the concrete buckets had also been modified in the field, shifting an anchor point so that the line pulled at an angle instead of straight up. These details might not have mattered on a fully cured ring of concrete. On lift 28, they were catastrophic. When the third bucket of concrete rose that morning, witnesses saw the hoist cable jerk, go slack, and then swing back toward the tower. The load it carried may have shifted the platform just enough to trigger the failure. The moment lift 28 gave way, everything anchored into it followed. The first people to run toward the tower were the surviving workers on the ground. Some grabbed shovels and crowbars, others climbed partway up the rubble pile, calling out names, hoping to find pockets of space where someone might still be alive. Dust hung thick in the air, coating faces and clothing. The interior of the tower looked like a bowl filled with broken stone and twisted metal. Nothing moved. Fire crews from small towns across West Virginia and Ohio converged on the site. Ambulances lined the access road. But it quickly became clear there would be no rescues, only recoveries. The small volunteer fire station in nearby Belmont became a temporary morgue. Bodies were brought in covered with blankets or canvas sheets, laid out in rows, while families waited outside in stunned silence. Many victims were unrecognizable. Some were identified only by personal belongings or the memories of co-workers who had stood beside them moments before the collapse. One extended family lost 11 men. The shock rolled through the Ohio Valley within hours. Some family members first learned something had happened when they saw a cloud of dust rising above the towers or heard sirens screaming past their houses. By the afternoon, state troopers blocked off the road leading to the plant, trying to manage traffic as hundreds of anxious people arrived, seeking answers that officials didn't yet have. OSHA sent investigators that same day. Specialists from the National Bureau of Standards arrived soon after. Their task was to determine not only how the tower failed, but why the signs had been missed. Core samples and lab tests confirmed that Lift 28 was nowhere near full strength. Some samples measured just over 200 pounds per square inch, far below what was required. The test cylinders meant to verify curing strength had been improperly handled, giving supervisors no accurate data for decision-making. In the absence of reliable numbers, the schedule dictated the pace. The platform had been raised onto concrete that was not ready. Investigators also found incomplete bolt patterns, inadequate fasteners, and the altered hoist system pulling sideways on a structure already close to its limits. Each flaw reduced the margin of safety. Together, they erased it entirely. OSHA eventually issued multiple willful and serious violations. The total fines, just over $85,000, felt insultingly small compared to the scale of the loss. A federal grand jury reviewed the case, but no criminal charges were filed. The collapse became a cautionary example in construction safety courses and engineering reports, a case study in what happens when pressure overrides patience. At Willow Island, the site was eventually cleared and the cooling tower completed. The plant went into service. Drivers passing along the river saw only two massive gray shells venting warm air into the sky. Nothing on the outside showed where 51 men had stood seconds before they fell. But in the town surrounding the plant, the date never faded. Families remembered the men who climbed the tower before dawn, expecting an ordinary day, unaware that the concrete beneath their boots had not been given the strength it needed. The Willow Island collapse remained a quiet scar on the landscape, a reminder that when safety is rushed, entire structures, entire crews can vanish in seconds. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.